What was meant to be the focus for this week, the first budget for Mark Carney's government. We now have a better sense of his plan to jolt Canada's economy in the face of U.S. tariffs. The budget includes $141 billion in new spending over the next 5 years. Much of it is focused towards infrastructure, housing, and defense. The budget includes huge cuts to 40,000 government positions and finding $60 billion in cuts and other savings. Still, this budget will not be balanced. The deficit, that's how much the government spends versus how much money it's bringing in, more than $78 billion this year. The Carney government says it's a price worth paying that they say will supercharge Canada's economic growth. François-Philippe Champagne is the Minister of Finance. Thank you for joining me.
It's a real pleasure to be with you, Catherine.
You and the Prime Minister promised a budget that would be transformational, generational, but I'm sure you know there's a lot of criticism that it didn't meet the mark. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce says the budget is more transitional than transformational. The Business Council of Canada says it's not transformational. Economist Mike Moffat says on housing, disappointing is too weak of a word. Does it worry you when so many voices are saying they're not sure that this does the job?
I think Canadians understand there's a bit of headwind. We felt it in people feel it on the factory floor, in the fields. People have seen it in so many ways in their life. What we're saying, but if you look at Canada, we have the fiscal capacity to be able to invest in ourselves. And then we have to be judicious in where we invest. So infrastructure, housing, productivity and competitiveness, and obviously our sovereignty and our defense. And therefore, at the same time, you need to put the house in order. That's what people tell me. They said, we agree you need to be ambitious in your investment, but also rigorous in expenses. So I would say, if you compare Canada to all the other G7 countries, you would see that Canada stands out with respect to transforming and making generational investment. In that context, you would see that Canada stands out.
Minister, I want to ask you about those headwinds you mentioned. You are trying to use tax write-offs and other measures to basically psych businesses up about spending money and making investments. There is still a lot of economic uncertainty because of Donald Trump. Isn't that going to make it a lot harder to do what you're trying to do right now to convince businesses to invest?
Well, I would say, what's the alternative? I think we need to invest in ourselves, build one Canadian economy, finish the work of confederation, make sure that if you produce goods in one province, they can be sold across the nation. We need to become our own best customers. And overall, we need to invest in ourselves. Yes, there's headwind. It's not unique to Canada. Our largest trading partner decided to change the rules of the game, and we feel it. Other countries are feeling it. But I would say in that sense, that's why we want to have an investment budget.
Okay, I want to ask you about affordability. Pardon me, Minister. I do want to ask you about affordability because you mentioned it there. A lot of measures aimed at business. Regular folks who are struggling to pay their bills, though. There's not new help in this budget, or certainly not a lot of it. Why not offer more pocketbook help to people?
Well, the first thing we did was a tax cut for 22 million Canadians. That's the flagship initiative on affordability. But we didn't wait for the budget. Well, but we didn't wait for the budget, but it's in the budget because that was something that Canadians needed now. So we could have waited for the time of the budget, but we did it in advance. We did, in fact, as the first measure. Then we said what we need, what people are concerned about is affordable housing. We're doubling down to make sure that we can build more affordable homes for Canadians, which is really for many families, that's the big thing because, how much you put in your budget for your housing is very key for Canadian families. So that's why we wanted to act there. And at the same time, we wanted to make sure that by building a strong economy, there would be more opportunities and possibilities for Canadians. So affordability, you're right, that's the key point. And that measure of reducing taxes is leaving more money in the pockets of Canadians.
Pardon me, Minister, but let's talk a bit more about that because there is a substantial deficit in this budget, $78 billion more. The Conservatives point out Canada is now spending more money on debt servicing than federally on healthcare. They say it's not sustainable. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say 75% of it was first for affordability and secondly for sovereignty. I think Canadians would understand that faced with the changing world, the scope, speed and scale of what's happening in the world, you probably have to go back to 1945 or the fall of the Berlin Wall to see so much change at the same time. And so the first thing we did what Canadians would do, we supported each other. So when there were tariff imposed on industry, our auto workers, our steel workers, our canola farmers, we said, we will stick together. We will help these industry to pivot. We will help the workers, we'll help the families. The other part of it is measures around affordability, which you mentioned as the first one, which is the tax cut that we offered to 22 million Canadians. So if you look at that number, you just have to remember, because that's important for people watching and listening to us, is that 75% of it is for sovereignty and affordability. And I think the moment requires that in terms of investment in people, because yes, you want to pivot, but at the same time, you need to take care of people now. And that's why you see in that number, a good part of it is really to do two things that I would say Canadians would say. Obviously, you need to respond to the tariffs, and obviously at the same time, if you can support Canadian on affordability, that's what people need now.
On Friday, the Prime Minister said, quote, "Don't worry, we're on the pipeline stuff. It's gonna happen." Does that mean that your government is about to go ahead with this pipeline without BC's buy-in, Minister?
Well, what I can say is that, we have the ambition to be an energy superpower. Canada is already an energy superpower in conventional and renewable energy, and the world needs more of Canada's energy. So I think this has been, and it's not just new, this has been key to the Canadian economy.
Right,
and
but
we
is a
can do that
pipeline
responsibly, sustainably. Sorry.
But but I understand that, Minister, but he's saying a new pipeline is going to happen, and we don't have buy-in from BC. So I'm trying to figure out how you're going to square that.
But I would say, let's see. For the time being, we have the major project office. We said that we would do things in this country differently. We'll work with our Indigenous partner. We'll work with obviously provinces. At the same time, I think also Canadians understand that the natural resources sector is a big engine of Canadian economy. This is a blueprint for success. This is a confident country invest in themselves, and I think this is why I say it's generational, transformational, because you have to compare that with what our peers are doing. And if you look at Canada, we not only have the wherewithal to do it, but I think if you look at what we're doing, we're very strategic in how we invest Canadians' money to make sure that they have a return and we can build that strong economy, resilient economy, to succeed in this new world.
Finally, Minister, as we're recording this, the Conservatives have lost 2 MPs this week. I wonder whether you would be comfortable with the Liberals getting a majority government through floor crossings, wielding power that you didn't win in an election.
Well, listen, I've been a bit busy this week, as you might have seen. So
I'm sure you noticed,
I've really focused on the budget and delivering for Canadians, because, one thing they told me, we want to move from reliance to resilience and the uncertainty you set into opportunity. So my focus has been there. Obviously, we welcome Chris D'Entremont, the new member in our team. And I think, there's probably people on the other side which are doing a bit of soul searching, because when you look at the budget that's going to invest more in infrastructure, municipal infrastructure, health infrastructure that are needed across our country, strengthen our armed forces to defend our sovereignty, making our small, medium-sized businesses more competitive, do more affordable housing. I think for them, there's a bit of soul searching, because I can tell you the mood of the nation. I was on the road for the last 2 days in the airports, in the street. People said, Canada is meeting the moment. We're going to invest in ourselves. We're going to be strong, and it's going to be okay. So I think I would not be surprised that you have people on the other side of the aisle which are doing a bit of soul searching. How could they explain to their constituents?
Not just soul searching? Is that what you're implying?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not. I can only imagine if you're on the other side and you see these things. It's pretty difficult to go back to your constituent and say, at a moment like that, you would not be supporting Canada to go forward and really, support the government agenda and the budget, which is really driven to grow Canada stronger. I mean, that's what I assume is going on for a number of people on the other side of the aisle.
Did you deliberately court some of them with this budget, though, particularly announcing specific projects that would be in opposition ridings?
Well, listen, I only focus on what Canadians want. To be honest, I don't have much time to go around and I listen to people. Obviously, we're a minority government. We need to work with others. But this is really a budget that puts Canadian first.
I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much, François-Philippe Champagne.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
His floor crossing brings the Liberals to 170 seats in the House of Commons. That's too shy of a majority. The clock is now ticking to find support as the budget comes up for a confidence vote in a week's time. Their best option appears to be the NDP, and with 7 seats, that party could tip the scales and help the government pass its budget by voting for it or by abstaining. Gord Johns is a British Columbia NDP MP. So you've had a few days now, Gord. Have you decided whether you're going to vote against the budget, vote to support it, or just abstain?
Right now, Catherine, our objective, each of us in the NDP caucus, is to go home to our ridings, to listen to constituents, meet with stakeholders, and hear what they have to say, what they've seen in the budget, what they didn't see, and what they're concerned about in the budget.
What is it that you want to hear from them that you haven't already gleaned by looking at it yourself?
Well, I think the bottom line is, do people want to have an election? I think that's first and foremost. And if they do, are they willing to vote against this budget? And do they want us to vote against this budget, bring the government down, and go back to the polls? We just had an election 5 months ago. If not, then are they willing to accept the budget as is? And so right now, we saw this government table a budget that was supposed to be transformational. It's far from that. There's huge letdowns. There's things that are in the budget that we've got concerns about. There's things that aren't in the budget, and we've got a lot of questions why and what's happening. And then there's some things that we like in the budget. So, looking at all of that and weighing that out, we need to go back to our constituents and ask them what their thoughts are on it.
What worries you most about the budget?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the cuts to the public service. I mean, 40,000 jobs that are going to be cut. We know what it looks like. When this government cut 3,000 jobs at CRA, in terms of the call centers, people can't get an answer when they call CRA. We saw the Conservatives do this when they were in government. They cut a third of Veterans Affairs, and the backlog grew to 50,000 for veterans on their disability applications. So when the public service gets cut, people don't get service. They don't get the support they need. So starting there, that's certainly one thing that we're deeply concerned about, and the lack of money for things like pharmacare to sign more deals and more agreements. So there's a lot there that we could talk about in terms of what's missing and things that are in the budget that we've got concerns about.
Now, in terms of how the NDP approaches this, you said you're going to go listen to your constituents. Are the 7 of you all going to be on the same page here? Or if you come back and say, okay, my constituents are ready to go to an election over this, and one of your colleagues doesn't feel that way, could you each go in your own direction?
Well, I think, you're not going to see us vote, against and for the budget, for example. I think that as a group, we're going to have those conversations. And
but some could abstain? Is that what's baked into
potentially that could happen. I mean, it's pretty hard to vote for a budget where you're going to cut 40,000 jobs and you say you're creating jobs, but you're cutting jobs at the same time.
But the size of the public service has grown, exponentially over the last few years. Do you not feel that there's any room for pulling back?
I think that right now, when we see the duress and the stress that people are under, working people, in terms of what they need help. And right now, we're not meeting the service levels that Canadians expect. I cited the CRA as a cut of 3,000 jobs. What's 40,000 going to look like? Ask a veteran that waited, for well over a year to have their disability application open. So, right now, people need help. They're dealing with the rising cost of living, the pressures that they're under. There was nothing in this budget to address the impact that they're facing in terms of cost of living. We see the biggest corporations posting record profits. They're getting hit at the grocery till, they're getting hit when they at the pump, they're getting hit when they try to access the internet or their cell phone provider, and on their mortgages and or to pay their rent. And at the same time, the big banks, the big grocery stores, the big telecommunication companies are making record profits right now.
Now, there is some conversation about telcos in the budget, but I want to talk about what's in the budget in terms of some of your personal priorities. Part of the reason we're having this conversation, there are specific things that you pushed for, in some cases for years, that I imagine it's difficult for you to say, well, I won't support a budget that has this in it. You wanted, for instance, more a national aerial firefighting fleet after dealing with fires in your own riding. This budget leases 4 planes for that purpose. For years, you've been advocating for a biomass fuel tax credit. That is here. Has the government made it pretty tough for you to say, a straight no to this budget.
Well, these are wins for everybody. So everybody wins when we make sure that we have a national aerial firefighting fleet to deal with surge capacity. Well, I mean, we saw what happened last summer. I mean, everybody should be on board. These aren't partisan issues. We're dealing with wildfires like we've never seen. The last 5 years, are record-breaking. The impact on human health, on climate, from the release of carbon emissions. This is having a huge toll on the economy. And guess who's impacted the most? Indigenous peoples, because they live in rural communities.
Can you vote against that?
Well, this is going to be the challenge that I'm going to be, having in those difficult conversations with my caucus. But first, I'm going to go home and talk to my constituents. They have said that this needs to be a priority, that when provinces and territories are in trouble, that we have the ability to support them with surge capacity, with aerial firefighting. And that being said, BC didn't have a record season when it came to wildfires, but they had a record season in loaning equipment to other provinces and territories. So a lot of pressure there. Of course, the forest sector under massive duress right now and pressure. The biomass tax credit is designed to be an input tax credit to help deal with, some of that waste material for clean energy and support the forest sector. So this will generate a lot of jobs. So yeah, they definitely have put some items in there that are going to make an impact for workers
and maybe
for
make
the
it
environment.
Tough for you. Well, none of this is happening in a vacuum, though, obviously. We are seeing what has played out with the Conservative Party this week, a floor crosser, MP Matt Genereux saying he's going to resign. How does that affect your calculation here, that the numbers are shifting?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, my best wishes to Matt and his family. I worked closely, as you know, with Matt Genereux on men's mental health issues, and he was a champion. We did Father's Day on the Hill to talk about the challenges that men face when it comes to mental health. And he's a great MP, one of the most nonpartisan MPs in Parliament, and a very likable human being. In terms of the math, I don't think that makes a difference. We are going to go back, listen to our constituents, come back as a caucus, have that robust conversation on not only what's best for our ridings, but what's best for Canada. And that's really important. That has to be first and foremost in all of our decision making. I mean, we've proven time and time again that we're the adult in the room. Whether it be at committee or in the House of Commons, we're going to do that too when it comes back to how we calculate how we move forward. And certainly our priority first and foremost is always to our constituents. So I need to go back to my riding, listen to the people who I am responsible to ensure that I'm engaging them and how I make decisions, especially decisions that have such a profound magnitude on our country. But like I said, I don't think most Canadians want to go back to the polls. Certainly know that the challenges we face right now as a country with the threat of Donald Trump, that is coming into the calculation in all the conversations I'm having back home with people on the phone this week. So we're hearing from people, and but there needs to be a more robust conversation. Indigenous peoples, we're seeing a cut of 2% at Indigenous Services Canada. How could Indigenous peoples have a cut when they need actually more investment? The gap for infrastructure for Indigenous peoples is enormous, and so this isn't a time to cut.
The government is attempting this push-pull here because there is additional investment for drinking water, but I do want to ask you, we just have a moment left. You talk about having conversations. Have the Liberals tried to woo you, Gord Johns? Are they trying to get you to cross the floor?
Oh, that's an everyday conversation they have with me, and it's a flat no, and they know. I mean, that's been going on for years, and no.
Has there been any added intensity with everything that's going on right now?
No, I think that I've been pretty clear, and they know that I'm a New Democrat. I mean, let's face it, they've moved over closer to the progressive Conservatives of the past. I don't think it was a far stretch for Chris D'Entremont it wasn't a big leap for him to cross over and join the Liberal Party of today, because Carney's running on an agenda that I would say is a progressive Conservative agenda, and the Conservative Party has certainly pivoted back to more of the Reform Party of the past and a mega type party.
Do you then feel confident that no NDP MP will cross the floor?
I'm very confident. I mean, you look at the 7 MPs, they are strong social New Democrats. We are dedicated to our cause and our movement, and you will see that in the coming days and years ahead. None of us I'm not even concerned about that in the very least at all.
Okay. Thank you for this conversation. Gord Johns, NDP MP. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Catherine. Thanks.
So what does this budget tell us about the Carney government's priorities? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Rob Russo is Canada correspondent for The Economist and former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief. Tonda MacCharles is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. And Aaron Wherry is a senior writer for CBC News. Okay, everybody, we are going to talk about floor crossings. Nobody panic. We're going to focus on that next hour. But the budget, of course, remains incredibly important. So I want to do big takeaway. Rob, I'll start with you. What stood out the most in this budget?
I think it showed all the swashbuckling audacity that one would expect from a central banker. It suffered a little bit, if not a lot, from the fact that the Prime Minister told us over and over again that we were in a hinge moment in history that required bold action at speed that we'd never seen before. Now, it's not easy to make a 180-degree turn in the 10th largest economy in the world, and one has to anticipate that this is the beginning of a multi-step process. The next step, I assume, will come after the Grey Cup and more projects are announced. But I think people were expecting bolder action just based on the Prime Minister's rhetoric.
Tonda, do you think the Liberals were hurt by the expectations they set here?
Well, I didn't know whether Rob was being sarcastic or not, but, I think you could say that this was generationally overhyped a little bit and catalyzed a lot of news stories about whether or not it lived up to that hype. I think that what surprised me in the budget, not that it lived up to some of the pre-budget billing that it was going to spend big on defense and infrastructure and housing, but that some of the play to drive investment relied largely on a playbook that the Trudeau government has also used, and to, I would say, perhaps disappointing effect. And by that I mean the Carney government is banking big on investment tax credits to drive public sector or private sector investment. It's also relying on leveraging provinces' spending to match their funds and get public sector investment in various sectors. Those are both things that were tried by the Trudeau government, and we've seen this week that in some respects all the clean energy tax credits, the incentives that were put in, have not delivered what was expected. So that was a bit of a surprise to me.
Aaron, there are things in this budget, and to some extent we talked about it with Gord Johns. They're about priorities that the opposition has, not just specific issues like community centers or aerial firefighting fleets, but, immigration targets, climate action. How much do you think this budget was designed to appeal to the opposition parties?
I think in certain small targeted ways, you can see the outreach, and you referenced some of it in your interview with Gord Johns. I do, though, think this is kind of a still take it or leave it budget. I think, what stood out to me in that conversation with Gord Johns was how often he said, well, do Canadians really want an election right now? And I suspect the calculation is that they don't. And I suspect that Mark Carney and his government is very aware of that. I think, to what Tonda and Rob said, I do think this budget did suffer a bit from some of the adjectives that were thrown around to describe it, and from the fact that so much of this was, announced beforehand. The defense spend, the income tax cut, the big ticket items we knew coming into it. So I think a lot now comes down to sort of how quickly some of these economic measures can show results. I think Tonda is very correct to point out that the Trudeau government promised a lot of these things in terms of economic results and had a hard time sort of producing it. And I think the other piece of this that's still to come, and we still don't really have a good grasp of in terms of the impact, is the cuts. I think we don't yet really understand what that's going to look like, and we don't yet know how Canadians are going to react to some of the cuts that are going to be made.
Well, and in fact, we don't, it sounds as if the government is not entirely clear yet on precisely which programs are being cut. We know about a few of them, the reduction of the 2 billion trees program. But Rob, I heard the Justice Minister say this week, probably going to have to wait a couple months, perhaps, certainly weeks, to find out what's involved. I wonder, though, Rob, the government keeps insisting this was a bold budget, even as, Ontario, one of the ministers there, saying it lacks ambition. Do you think that they are wise to continue pressing the idea that this budget is this hinge moment, or should they just sort of plow ahead and try to get enough support to not bring down their government?
I think they erred a little bit. A cabinet minister I was speaking to beforehand said this is part of a two-step process, and linked it in some ways to what happened when the Saint-Martin team got in 94, 95. Their first budget was considered tepid in the face of what was required, which was the IMF knocking on the door. We have different dire circumstances now than we had then, but we were told how dire the circumstances were. But so it's a two-step, we're told. But I think it's even more than that. It is a multi-step. And I do think that we will see a prime minister, in effect, trying to use the levers of state to do what the private sector right now seems to be unwilling to do. But that won't come in this document. It will come in the series of projects, the next series of projects that'll be announced after next Sunday. And I think it'll come in further budgets as well. The question will be whether or not a large percentage of the investment required to make those projects happen come from government coffers, or will business finally get off the sidelines? They've been very, very reluctant to do so under good circumstances. Now we're in rather difficult, if not grim circumstances, whether they'll be willing to do that.
Well, that reminds me, though, the 94 budget of Paul Martin, which was set to deal with our debt crisis and our deficit crisis then, was viewed largely as a bit of a miss, a swing and a miss. And so that he came back in 95 with drastic spending cuts to meet the targets. And so if we expect to see a second step budget, nobody's been publicly saying that at this stage. We're left to rely on what this budget says to deal with the crisis that we face, which in large measure is driven by the U.S. tariff disputes and the tariffs globally, but especially on Canada. And I think what's interesting in this budget is that it acknowledges that we're going to see, much more anemic growth than expected as a result. And to me, that big sucking sound you hear is the suck of investment dollars going to the U.S. and sitting on the sidelines when it looks at Canada. Perhaps you're right, Rob, about, will the next wave of projects sort of goose more interest? I'm not clear on that. The Prime Minister is signaling, I'm going to do pipelines. We'll see. He made that dependent on whether we can scale up technology on carbon capture, which hasn't been proven at that scale and will require billions and billions more of government investment. So I think there are a lot of uncertainties and big question marks still.
Okay. One big question mark, what Aaron Wherry thinks about whether this budget will pass. We're going to have to hang on, though. Aaron, we'll kick off the next block with you right now. We're going to put things on pause. Rob Russo, Tonda MacCharles, Aaron Wherry. We will see you next hour. You can go grab yourselves a coffee in the meantime.